Tanisha Carter stood frozen as laughter rippled through the pristine mats of Iron Veil Jiu-Jitsu Academy in Atlanta. Moments earlier, Coach Brent Halston, a former regional MMA fighter turned head instructor, had swept her legs from under her during a demonstration. She hit the ground hard, the room erupting in chuckles. "Spin class is down the street," Brent said with a smirk, pulling at his black belt. "This mat's for real fighters." Phones recorded, students whispered. No one noticed the calm in Tanisha's eyes, or the way her fingers instinctively curled. Battle-hardened and precise, as she rose, a worn military dog tag slipped from beneath her GI top before she quietly tucked it back in. To them, she was just another out-of-place black woman in a predominantly white, elite space. Some assumed she got in on a diversity scholarship. Others just ignored her altogether. What did she expect? Someone muttered. This isn't yoga. But what they didn't know, what they never cared to ask, was that Tanisha had spent 8 years training Marines in close combat before an IED ended her service. And they had just mocked the wrong woman. Part 1. Humiliated on the mat. The echo of Brent Halston's voice still hung in the air like a slap. "This mat's for real fighters." His words weren't just cruel, they were intentional. Every syllable was designed to humiliate, to draw a line between who belonged and who didn't. Tanisha Carter stood up slowly, her hands steady even as her heart pounded. The polished mats of Iron Veil Jiu-Jitsu Academy were still vibrating with laughter. A few phones remained aimed her way, screens glowing with the promise of viral humiliation. No one rushed to help. No one apologized. They just watched. From the mirrors lining the far wall, Tanisha saw her own reflection, tall, lean, hair tied back into a tight bun, sweat darkening the collar of her GI. She looked calm, too calm, maybe, but inside, there was a storm she refused to let loose. This wasn't the first time someone like Brent had tried to reduce her to a punchline. Iron Veil, located in a trendy, upscale neighborhood just north of downtown Atlanta, marketed itself as elite martial arts for serious athletes. But that slogan, as Tanisha quickly realized, was a thin disguise for a place built on hierarchy and exclusion. Most students came from wealth. Many were former athletes or corporate professionals chasing fitness goals and bragging rights. Almost all were white. Tanisha had saved for 2 months to afford the $225 monthly membership fee. She had walked in with her head held high, believing her background as a Marine would earn at least some respect. It hadn't. From the start, Brent treated her like an outsider. When she asked questions, his answers were curt. When she demonstrated flawless technique, he accused her of showing off. The other students followed his lead, avoiding her during drills, whispering when she made a mistake, rolling their eyes when she corrected her stance. Today's takedown wasn't an accident. It was calculated. He'd called her to the center of the mat during the advanced class, claiming he needed a partner to demonstrate control against resistance. She had bowed respectfully, unaware of what was coming. In one quick, forceful move, Brent swept her legs with unnecessary aggression, slamming her onto the mat harder than protocol allowed. It knocked the air out of her lungs. It also knocked the mask off his professionalism. Someone near the back had laughed too loudly. Someone else muttered, "Guess we know who the beginner is." Tanisha said nothing. She stood. She adjusted her belt, and with that single, quiet motion, tucking her dog tag back beneath her collar, she reclaimed her dignity. But the damage was done. Not to her body, but to the illusion that Iron Veil was a place of integrity. What the others didn't realize, as they snickered and scrolled through their phones, was that they had just shown their character. And the woman they laughed at? She wasn't just some out-of-place beginner. She was a decorated combat instructor. And she had been underestimated before. Part 2. The discipline they couldn't see. Tanisha didn't quit. That's what set her apart. Not just from the others at Iron Veil, but from anyone who had ever tried to define her by surface-level impressions. After the humiliating demonstration, she showed up to every class on time. Never late, never absent. She didn't ask for sympathy, didn't demand apologies. She tied her belt, bowed to her instructors, and got to work. But make no mistake, she remembered. Brent Halston might have tried to humiliate her, But Tanisha had spent 8 years training Marines how to survive hand-to-hand combat in real-world scenarios. Not air-conditioned studios. She knew how to take hits. She'd taken worse, both in war zones and back home. Every smirk from the other students, every whisper that stopped when she walked by, only sharpened her focus, while they posed for selfies or compared supplements. Tanisha drilled her techniques in silence. Alone in her modest apartment on the west side of Atlanta, she pushed back furniture to make space for solo practice. She trained before dawn and after dinner. The routine, the repetition, it was the rhythm of discipline. The kind civilians rarely understood. She didn't brag, she didn't correct them when they called her a beginner. But she took note. When paired for drills, she executed with mechanical precision. Her partners rarely noticed that she adjusted her grip to compensate for the old injury in her right shoulder, shrapnel damage from Afghanistan. They also didn't notice how she deliberately avoided outperforming them, even when she could clearly see their mistakes before they made them. Respect, she believed, wasn't something you demanded, it was something you embodied. And outside of Iron Veil, there were people who saw it. Twice a week, after her shift at the VA rehab center where she worked as a physical therapist, Tanisha trained with Master Sergeant Darnell Hughes, a retired Marine combat instructor who had once taught her father. He ran a small group out of a community gym in Decatur. No fancy mats, no tiered memberships, just raw skill, sweat, and honor. You move like someone with purpose, he said the first night she arrived, nodding with approval. You still remember the mission. Under his guidance, she refined her movements, elevating her Jiu-Jitsu far beyond what Iron Veil ever offered. Darnell didn't care about her gender or the color of her skin. He cared about technique, timing, and heart, and Tanisha had all three. You could teach this, he said one evening, wiping sweat from his brow. Hell, you should be teaching this. But Tanisha wasn't interested in ego or titles. She wanted control, she wanted peace, and maybe, deep down, she wanted a moment, not to prove them wrong, but to remind herself she still carried that same fire, even after everything life had stripped away. Meanwhile, Iron Veil continued its quiet campaign of exclusion. Brent began using Tanisha as an example of poor form during class. Her locker was moved, her name was omitted from the tournament board. The whispers grew sharper, the eyes colder. Still, she trained. Because for Tanisha, Jiu-Jitsu wasn't about gym politics or validation from self-important instructors. It was about reclaiming her body, her identity, her rhythm. It was about remembering who she was before the injury, before the divorce, before the VA appointments and long nights staring at a ceiling fan spinning slowly in the dark. When she walked into Iron Veil, they saw a black woman past her prime, trying something she wasn't built for. What they didn't see was the battlefield behind her eyes, the relentless discipline carved into her every step. And that's the thing about people like Tanisha. You can overlook them, you can mock them, but you can't break them. If you're still here, still walking this journey with Tanisha, leave a number 1 in the comments below. I see you, and I promise, it's about to get even better. Part 3. 14 seconds. Tanisha had waited patiently. For months, she endured every slight, every insult, every eye roll and smirk at Iron Veil Jiu-Jitsu Academy. She'd swept mats, been benched, and used as a cautionary tale by Brent Halston. But now the mat was hers. The Atlanta Open had drawn fighters from all over the Southeast, brown belts from Savannah, black belts from Nashville, gyms representing Charlotte to Birmingham. The convention center buzzed with energy, the smell of sweat and sports tape hanging thick in the air. Banners fluttered above vendor booths. Dozens of matches played out on parallel mats. Tanisha warmed up alone in a corner. Just like she had trained. No entourage. No cameras. No drama. Just her breath, and her rhythm. When her name came over the loudspeaker, the buzz of conversation dimmed. Tanisha Carter, please report to Mat 3. At first, it didn't make sense. She hadn't expected to compete yet. Then came the follow-up, due to a medical withdrawal in the men's expert division. The alternate will advance. Ms. Carter, you've been verified through Marine Corps combat instructor credentials and community endorsement. The room fell into stunned silence. Eyes turned, whispers spread, Brent Halston stormed toward the official's table, his face red with disbelief. "That's impossible," he barked. "She's not qualified. She's a white belt." The tournament director, a stern woman in her 60s with a clipboard and zero tolerance for nonsense, didn't blink. Her credentials were verified through Master Sergeant Darnell Hughes. "She meets the criteria." And then, like fate had a sense of humor, the official bracket was posted. First match: Brent Halston versus Tanisha Carter. The crowd gasped. Brent's face drained of color. There was no backing out, not without looking like a coward in front of everyone he'd ever tried to impress. He had spent months ridiculing her, painting her as weak, incapable. Now he would have to face her, on equal ground, under equal rules, with nowhere to hide. Tanisha stepped onto the mat, calm as ever. She bowed to the referee, then to Brent. He barely nodded. His confidence cracked. The whistle blew. Brent lunged, aggressive and loud, reaching for a collar grip. That was his first mistake. Tanisha flowed like water, clean, composed. She sidestepped, redirected, and within seconds, executed a flawless sleeve drag. Brent stumbled forward just enough. She slid beneath, locked her hips, and secured the arm. He didn't have time to resist. In 14 seconds, Brent Halston was flat on his back, red-faced and tapping frantically as Tanisha's armbar held his pride hostage. The whistle blew again. The match was over. 14 seconds. There was no cheering at first. Just stunned silence. Then a ripple of gasps. A few claps. And finally, a rising chorus of awe. She just submitted Halston. In 14 seconds. No way. People crowded the edge of the mat. Phones rose. Cameras clicked. Brent scrambled off the ground, refusing the customary handshake, his face flushed with rage and shame. Tanisha stood, bowed to the referee, and walked back to her corner with the same steady grace she'd carried through every humiliation, every whisper, every match she'd ever swept. Darnell was waiting with a grin. "Clean, cold, clinical," he said. "Your father would be proud." Tanisha touched the dog tags beneath her GI and let the words sink in. Behind her, the Iron Veil team sat in stunned silence. Students who once ignored her now stared with open mouths. A few lowered their eyes, ashamed of their complicity. And Claire, the one who had smirked during her worst moment, stood frozen, a dawning respect replacing her old smugness. That one match changed everything. It wasn't just a victory, it was a reckoning. A public, undeniable reminder that discipline, dignity, and patience weren't weaknesses. They were weapons, and in the right hands, they were unstoppable. Tanisha didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She simply nodded, adjusted her belt, and prepared for the next match. But everyone watching knew, nothing would ever be the same again. Part 4. The Ripple Effect. Tanisha's 14-second submission did more than just end a match, it cracked open a system. By the time she walked off the mat, footage of the victory was already spreading across social media. Dozens of phones had caught it. The angles varied, but the result was the same. Brent Halston, the towering black belt of Iron Veil, reduced to a red-faced tap-out by the woman he'd spent months trying to humiliate. Comment sections lit up. "Wait, that's the same instructor who mocked her in class. She's ex-military, and they treated her like that? Yo, this is why you don't underestimate people, especially a Marine." The video hit 10,000 views in less than 48 hours. By the end of the week, it had over 1.2 million. But it wasn't just internet buzz. The consequences at Iron Veil came fast and hard. Several current and former students began speaking out. Anonymous accounts posted screenshots, audio recordings, and written complaints about Brent's long history of bullying, especially targeting women and students of color. The image he had so carefully curated, confident coach, skilled fighter, respected mentor, was unraveling. Even Maxwell Reed, the business-minded owner of Iron Veil, couldn't ignore it. When reporters began asking questions, he issued a carefully worded statement. Iron Veil Jiu-Jitsu Academy values integrity, respect, and inclusion. We are conducting a full review of recent allegations and have placed Coach Halston on temporary suspension pending investigation. Behind closed doors, however, Maxwell was panicking. New membership inquiries had plummeted. Several high-paying clients had withdrawn. Parents were asking about alternative academies for their kids. Brent Halston had become a liability. Within 2 weeks, the temporary suspension became permanent. His teaching contract was terminated. His profile was removed from the website. And though his black belt wasn't officially stripped, his standing in the Jiu-Jitsu community was damaged beyond repair. Justice hadn't just knocked, it had kicked the door down. At the academy, the atmosphere shifted. When Tanisha returned to attend her final few sessions, the same students who once ignored her now held the door open. The same instructors who rolled their eyes now offered nods of quiet respect. Some even asked questions, real ones. Claire, who had once whispered cruel jokes at Tanisha's expense, waited by the locker room one evening. She looked nervous, clutching the strap of her gym bag. "I came to say I'm sorry," she said quietly. "The things I said, the way I followed Brent's lead, I was wrong." Tanisha regarded her for a long moment. Then she nodded. "We all make judgments," she said. "What matters is whether we're willing to change." It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't loud, but it was real. Tanisha submitted her resignation from Iron Vale that same week. She didn't need them anymore. And frankly, they didn't deserve her. Maxwell tried to salvage the situation. "We'd like to offer you a leadership role," he proposed in a private meeting. "A chance to rebuild the academy culture. Women's self-defense. Veteran outreach. Your story resonates." It was a clever PR move. But Tanisha saw right through it. "Thank you," she said, "but I've already started something of my own." And she had. Back at the VA rehab center, word of her performance at the tournament had traveled fast. Veterans she'd worked with for months were inspired, asking her to teach them not just physical recovery, but how to fight again. Not in war, but in life. With dignity, with discipline, with purpose. Tanisha began developing a program, combining Jiu-Jitsu principles with trauma recovery. What started as a twice-weekly class grew rapidly, fueled by word of mouth and small community grants. Veterans, survivors, young women seeking strength, her mats were open to them all. And every time someone asked, "Are you the one from the video?" she'd smile slightly and redirect them to the present. That was just 14 seconds. She'd say, "We're building something bigger here." Justice had arrived, not with shouting, not with revenge, but with clarity. The truth had risen. Those who tried to bury her were now shadows in her rearview. And Tanisha? She was just getting started. If you're still walking with Tanisha on this journey, drop a number 2 in the comments. You've made it this far, and it's about to get even more powerful. Part 5. Legacy in Motion. 6 months after the Atlanta Open, the gym mats in Tanisha Carter's new training space bore little resemblance to the polished floors of Iron Vale. These mats weren't branded. They didn't sit under LED spotlights or between giant posters of championship belts. They were secondhand, patched with care, and laid down in the repurposed back room of a community center on Auburn Avenue. And every inch of them pulsed with purpose. Tanisha's program, Resilient Motion, had grown faster than anyone expected. What started as a modest physical therapy extension for a few veterans had evolved into something much more. A sanctuary for healing, discipline, and empowerment. 3 nights a week, that humble room echoed with the sounds of breath, movement, and stories long buried under trauma. She didn't advertise. She didn't need to. Word spread through the VA, through shelters, through quiet conversations between those who had lived with invisible scars. Tanisha welcomed them all. No rank, no titles, no belt colors that divided. Just motion, just breath, just respect. Master Sergeant Darnell Hughes became her assistant instructor, not out of obligation, but because he believed. His gruff voice balanced Tanisha's calm guidance. Together, they taught not only technique, but something deeper. Reclamation. Of the body, of control, of identity. One evening, after class, a young woman named Keisha lingered behind. She was in her late 20s, recently discharged from the Navy, still walking with a slight limp from a roadside explosion in Syria. She had said little during class, but her movements were precise, focused. As Tanisha wiped down the mats, Keisha approached and held out a small piece of paper. On it were the words, "You gave me my first night of sleep without a nightmare in months." Tanisha didn't say much. She didn't need to. She placed her hand gently on Keisha's shoulder and simply nodded. That was the kind of victory that mattered now. The 14-second submission had become legend in the Atlanta martial arts community. People still brought it up when Tanisha walked into events or seminars. Some asked her to reenact it. She always declined. The technique isn't the story, she would say. The discipline behind it is. For her students, especially the veterans, those words hit deep, because for them, resilience wasn't just about strength, it was about endurance. About getting up again, and again, no matter how many times life swept your legs from under you. Even Claire, once her critic at Iron Veil, had found her way into Tanisha's world. She began volunteering at Resilient Motion, helping with paperwork, assisting new students, and, eventually, pursuing certification in physical therapy. Under Tanisha's mentorship, she discovered a side of herself untouched by comparison or performance. You saw something in me I didn't, Claire admitted one night. No, Tanisha replied. You saw it. You just needed space to believe it. Outside of class, military and civilian organizations began to notice. Tanisha received emails from health departments, invitations to speak at trauma conferences, and even a feature on a regional public radio program. She never accepted the spotlight for herself. But when it served the mission, when it brought awareness or support to the people she served, she stood with quiet strength and spoke with unwavering clarity. Everywhere she went, she wore her father's dog tags over her GI now. No longer hidden, they had become her signature, a visible symbol of legacy. On the anniversary of his death, she made her annual trip back to Pennsylvania. The air was cold, the ground soft under her boots. She knelt by his gravestone and laid down a smooth stone. Just like every year. But this time, she brought something else. A photograph. In it, she stood with 20 students, men and women of all ages, races, and backgrounds, each holding a pair of gloves or a GI. Standing tall, standing proud, she placed the photo gently at the base of the stone. You were right, Dad, she said softly. The mission is always bigger than the noise. As she rose to leave, an elderly man approached from the path. He wore a worn veteran's cap and leaned on a cane. You're Robert Carter's daughter, aren't you? He asked. Tanisha nodded, surprised. I served with him in Beirut. The man said. He saved my life during the barracks bombing. He never talked about it. Just kept moving forward, mission to mission, quiet, but strong, just like you. He paused, eyes misty. He'd be real proud of the woman you've become. Tanisha swallowed hard. In that moment, surrounded by silence, memory, and a legacy deeper than belts or tournaments, she understood something fully. Strength isn't always loud. Sometimes, it moves in quiet circles. Sometimes, it takes exactly 14 seconds to change a life. But the real impact? That's measured in who we lift when the crowd is gone. Sometimes, strength wears no crown. Tanisha Carter's journey reminds us of something many forget. True strength doesn't shout, it endures. In a world quick to judge, where titles and appearances often decide who gets respect, Tanisha walked in quietly, black, female, underestimated, and let her discipline speak louder than any insult ever could. She was mocked, sidelined, and told she didn't belong. But she didn't react with rage or revenge. Instead, she responded with something far more powerful: focus, preparation, and purpose. And when the moment came, she didn't just win a match. She restored justice. She shattered the lie that strength looks a certain way, or comes from a certain kind of person. More importantly, she turned her pain into purpose, building a safe space for others who had been silenced, shamed, or told to stay in their lane. Through patience and quiet leadership, she reminded us all: what knocks you down doesn't define you. What you choose to rise for does. So if you've ever been overlooked, if someone ever made you feel small, if you're still standing, still showing up, you are the story someone needs to hear. If Tanisha's story moved you, let us know you're here. Comment the word respect below, and let's lift voices like hers together. Subscribe to the channel for more real stories of resilience, redemption, and quiet power, because sometimes the softest voices carry the deepest truths.